Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. This is Radio Free Mormon on the air, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Tonight's episode doesn't have a name yet. I'll figure one out later on, but it's a very important episode because we have two guests on the show tonight to talk about their story and the story of their 3-year-old daughter. This is Jared Jones and Ashley Jones, who are coming to us direct from the parking lot at their place of business. Jared and Ashley Jones, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Doing good.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it. And I understand that the reason you're in the car as opposed to being at your computer in probably the warmer office is because there was a problem with the code on the entry lock. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. But these people are troopers, and we're going to do this anyway from their car. Technology is amazing. The first thing I want to do tonight is to synopsize the basic elements of the lawsuit that the Jones have filed against certain individuals in Southern California. This parking lot and the lawsuit are both in Southern California. They live in Riverside, California. And here's what happened, okay? Because there's a lawsuit that has been filed by the Jones. It was filed back in November of 2021 against certain parties there in Southern California. And I'll recap that here in a second. And then as of August of this year, 2023, circumstances developed such and information came forth such that they added the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a defendant in this civil suit. So the nutshell of it is that back at a party in December of 2020, so 3 years ago, I'm recording this on December 9th, 2023, and this party was back in December of 2020. It was actually December 22nd of 2020 at their home, at the home of the Jones. They were having some friends over. They have children as well. And the friends brought children over, and it's a Christmas time get together, and they'll explain a little bit of the background of that. But, you know, you have friends over, right? And so they have a certain friend who's a member of the bishopric in their ward. And he came over with his wife, with their kids, and specifically with their 12-year-old son. Now, the Jones at the time have children, one of whom is a 3-year-old daughter. And the kids went off into another room to play. During the course of the play, the 12-year-old son of the bishopric member began wrestling with the 3-year-old daughter of the Jones and used the opportunity to touch her in her private parts. This is something that was not known at the time by the Jones, but circumstances developed where they found out about it. And they're going to describe what those circumstances are. They're going to find out that not only is this isn't just an allegation by a 3-year-old. This is actually something that the 12-year-old boy admitted to. And as time goes on, the Jones make the horrifying discovery, not only that this has happened to their daughter, but that this 12-year-old boy had acted out sexually prior to this incident on several occasions. And their parents and others in the church knew about it and did not tell the Jones about it or take any steps that would be reasonable in order to prevent it from happening again at their home at this party on this evening in December of 2020. Do I have that about right so far, Jared and Ashley?
More or less. Pretty close.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good for me. So Can you tell us now, I know this happens. You have no idea it happens when it happens. So what is the first thing? Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the first thing that happens? If you want to describe anything that happens at the party more, that's fine. But please lead into the answer to how it happens that you become aware that anything happened at the party between the 12-year-old and your 3-year-old daughter.
Well, I will clarify. There was a party the night before, like a ward, kind of like a ward. It was our family party, but the ward members were there. So we don't know about anything happening that night. It was the next day that this boy came over with a friend of our kid. So his parents were not there at the time.
Okay. But he had been there at the party the night before.
Yes.
All right.
Right.
And you had no notice of any problems with this 12-year-old boy?
No.
No. However, we will say that in the course of the next couple months, they did find out that their son was an abuser and had committed, when that kind of all got found out, they had committed the parents of the first victim that was known that their son would not be out of their supervision ever, and around children.
Kind of in exchange for not doing anything about it, like calling the police or anything. They just promised the victim's family, the first victim, that they would just keep him home. They'll figure it out themselves. Don't tell anybody. We'll keep him around, not around anybody, basically.
And for me to be clear on this is something that you are finding out about after the incident with your daughter, but that had occurred prior to the incident with your daughter. Is that right?
Well, he had been abusing that other victim for, it turns out, at least over a year or two before this.
Okay. So it
She had
was
come
known about
forward.
before the incident at your home.
We don't know how much everyone knew, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so before the first incident in our home, we don't know that they knew it then. We believe that they do, based on a whole bunch of different evidence that we've been made aware of. At the same time, we know, it's documented, that from I guess what I was leading into is that from the time that they knew about this first victim, and they said that they would not allow anybody to, or that they wouldn't allow their child to be around other children unsupervised, they dropped him off at our house again.
So yeah, that would have been January of 21. A few
The
members of the
following
board
month.
a few members of the board found out that something had happened with another child. Just kind of rumors, though. No one, they didn't want anyone to really know about it. And then someone tipped me off at church one day, and he said, "Hey, just be careful with your daughter around this boy, because there's rumors that he's been doing some stuff, And then the next day, he ends up at my house with another kid.
And yeah, and so
Was that in
Mom and Dad
January? Or are you
knew.
talking about the date in December of 2020?
No, this is
Did he-
January. This is afterwards.
So this is in
All right.
January, after the first confession had come out that he had molested another child.
We had no idea anything about our own child yet.
Here's what's going to be the easiest thing, I think, for the audience to understand. First off, we all, I think, already understand that you're both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you have been for a long time, and that this involves people who are members of the church within your ward, within your stake, many of the leaders of which you know, and some of which you're close friends with. The reason I'm drilling down about what it was that what it was that this 12-year-old's parents knew, and when they knew it, is because that's obviously a critical component of your lawsuit. In other words, it's one thing for parents to have no idea that anything's going on with their kid, and you bring your kid over to somebody's house and they come over there later and they act out in some way like this. Well, that's a level of responsibility where you can't really blame the parents if they didn't know in advance that there was a problem with this child, and this 12-year-old, needed to be supervised, and perhaps the parents told of any other children when he's coming over to visit. The degree to which the parents of this 12-year-old knew about the issues regarding their son prior to this December 2020 incident with your daughter is obviously very pivotal to your case. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our case is a little bit more nuanced than that, just because, going through depositions, what was found is that there were no procedures and no policies in place to protect from abusers like this. And I think that's more to the heart of where we're going with this.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, after it was known that this child was an abuser, regardless of whether we can prove or not that he did anything after that date, what he did do is he had unrestricted access to children without, without supervision. And so we don't actually know what did happen.
So we found out the first week of March. We found out because his dad called Jared.
Of 2021.
Yes.
Right.
Now, here's another thing that's going to be difficult because there's two timelines that are running parallel in this story. And the first timeline is what you found out and when you found out about it. The second thing, the second timeline is what really happened chronologically. In other words, what it is that was happening, even though you didn't know about it at the time that it was happening. And I think it will be easiest for the audience if we go through the chronological steps, as opposed to this is what I found out. And I found out at this point that this had happened way back then. And then later on, I found out from this person that this had happened way back when. It's very difficult to construct a timeline with an interview like that. So if you could just go ahead and understand that we know that, first off, this incident happened because the 12-year-old confessed to it. It's not about an allegation from a 3-year-old or anybody else. This is actually confessed to, together with other incidents. If you can just take us through the chronology of what happened that you know now happened, so you can take it leading up to December of 2020 and what you know about what the parents or the church knew about this 12-year-old prior to that.
Well, so initially everyone found out because a 7-year-old girl, I can't think of, he'd been molesting a 7-year-old girl who was his best friend's sister for, it turns out, at least a year or two before anyone found out about anything. And then he also confessed that in September of 2020, he touched a little boy in our ward as well, a 3-year-old boy.
Okay,
So that's
and that
all
was
before,
3 months in advance of the party. So at
Yes.
least two other victims.
Right.
And one over a period of about a year.
or longer. We don't know exactly how long.
All right.
So then in January, he ended up confessing to his parents because he thought he was caught.
Go ahead and tell that story if you would, because I know Jared told it to me yesterday. It's interesting how this got disclosed. And in this case, it was a bit of an accident. I mean, it's a good thing it got disclosed, but go ahead and tell us that story.
Yeah. So what happened is he was over at his friend's house and playing on the computer, and he typed bitch in on the computer, and his mom's friend was upset about that. And so, or his friend's mom was upset about that. So she called his mom and just said, hey, it's not a huge deal, but I'd appreciate it, if you would talk to him so he doesn't do that again. And so mom and dad, sit down with their son and say, hey, I got a call from so-and-so today, and said that something bad happened or something to that
Do you
effect.
have anything you want to tell me?
Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to tell me? And so at that point, he confessed, and he told them that he had touched this child on their chest and on their bottom.
Like his little sister.
Yeah.
His friend's little sister.
His friend's little sister on their chest and their bottom.
Which is your daughter.
And, yeah, which is, yeah. And then that just kind of devolved over a period of a couple months where, as they started going to therapy more and more.
Now, who's going to therapy? The boy is going to therapy?
No, the little girl, the first victim, the 7-year-old girl.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, but more and more information starts coming out.
And the bishop at that point did know about it.
Yep.
And stake president. They're all
Did or
friends.
did not?
They did, yes.
Yep.
And over that time, he was still coming to mutual, and there was during COVID. So we had mutual law at our house. We had church at our house at that time. And so he was there, no one knew anything. We ended up going back to church in person, and he sat in front of us after he had abused our daughter. The bishop knew that.
But you don't know that.
We did not know that yet.
And so to be clear, when Ashley says that we were having church at our house, this is not home church, like where were digitally meeting.
Yeah, this is the whole ward.
The
in our
whole ward.
backyard.
Yeah, the whole ward came to our house because we've got a large space to be able to do that.
So he was
Outdoors.
running around our backyard with little kids, and no one was told anything. No one was watching him.
And one of the things that I think is important to this, as well, is many people have been like, oh, well, nothing happened at the church. Okay, cool. We can't prove that. We did get, we got a couple letters in, I don't know, September of 2 years ago.
It was
Yeah.
it was a few months after this stuff happened.
Yeah,
maybe about a year.
that were anonymous letters. And once again, anonymous, okay, fine. But they were very specific and they named victims. And so the
Victims
letter,
that were not confessed to.
correct, the victims that were not confessed to. And
So these are anonymous
And-
letters letting you know that there are more victims out there of this 12-year-old boy.
Yeah.
yeah, and not just that though, but that it had happened after church at our house. We have what's called a pump track. It's like a little BMX track at our house. And so they said, something to the effect of behind the pump track.
And they named like kids in our ward.
Yeah, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old that he had stuck his hands down their pants.
But all these things happened after the church, leaders knew about it and didn't
do anything.
They just let him come. And
Okay, so let's do this timeline now. When is it that the church leaders, and by that the bishop and the stake president, knew about this 12-year-old boy and his proclivities?
Mid-January 21.
It was the day after the dad called me.
Yeah, it wasn't.
That's
the first victim they knew in January.
right.
About our child, and the other one at least a couple weeks before we found out in March.
Yeah, so we knew in March. The day after we found, or 2 days after we found out about it, I found out about it on a Friday night, and we didn't put all the pieces together on this until Saturday night.
I had a feeling. There's a family that lives down the street from them that also is close with them, and I had messaged her like, "Hey, do you know about what happened? Like, we just got a call from the dad." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, can we call you?" And they had gotten the same call from the dad.
Okay, so let's start with finding out how it happens. And when I say start, I mean this part of the story. How is it that you find out it happens? We've heard how it got disclosed by the 12-year-old accidentally to his mom, where she's angling about his typing bitch into the search function of his friend's computer. But she doesn't say that expressly, and he comes out and admits to sexually abusing your daughter. Tell me how you find out about that and what that was like.
So that portion of it actually was when he first came out and talked about the first victim. So from that point, the police got involved a couple months or weeks later or something like that, and were sitting down interviewing him.
The police only got called, though, because they were not keeping him away from other kids. The first victim's family found out that they were not being safe with him. So then they finally ended up calling the police, and they got involved.
That's the one with the 7-year-old girl who was abused for a period of about a year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so as that's going down, they figure out...
He confesses.
Yeah, so the police figure out that he has abused our child and this other child. Like, he confesses to those as well. And so when that happens, I get a call from Dad on a Friday night. And we had a big party that was about to go down at our house. And, we were just running around. And so Dad's conversation with me was very pointed. And like his intent was clear. It didn't become that clear until after. But basically he's like, look, hey, this thing happened, my son touched your daughter over her clothes on her vagina. And while he was wrestling, and he feels really bad. And, I'm sure that you're aware of this other incident. and this family has been trying to make our family's life hell, and
They just don't want any trouble.
they're like,
basically.
we love you guys so much, and we don't want to do anything to ruin our friendship, but we really just want our son to be able to
Take the sacrament.
yeah, like really to be able to get right with God, so that he literally did say on there, so that he can like continue to perform his priesthood functions, like
pass the sacrament.
yeah, he wants him to be able to pass the sacrament, and like that's the kind of shit that he's saying to me, like on this phone call, and how this other family is considering litigation against them, and it's been really hard for his family, and they feel so bad. And so, at the time when he's talking to me, I'm like, oh man, yeah, that must be so hard, and not even thinking
It worked.
yeah, about what he was delivering to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so
So the next day was Sunday.
Saturday.
Well, Sunday was coming up. And that day when we were starting to get ready for church, I was kind of thinking, hey, like, he shouldn't be at church. Like, there's victims we know in this ward. Like, they shouldn't have to see him at church today. Like, and Jared had called the bishop and stake president, and it turns out they didn't care. They weren't going to do anything about it.
Well, I think they were on the same page with mom and dad. And that is the dangerous part of the church, is when you have the people that are calling the shots that have a vested interest, not only from a perspective of making everybody feel warm and fuzzy, but also in meaning the members of the ward, but then also wanting to make sure the best thing happens for this boy. And it was said so many times, like, should one little mistake ruin the rest of his life? Like, yes.
They're all best friends, all these families. Not us, the bishopric, stake president, and the perpetrator's family.
But huge conflict of interest. Yeah. Like, the people that were calling the shots here, besides Kirtan and McConkey, right? The people that were calling the shots wanted the best thing for that boy. That's what they wanted. They did not care about the victims. They can say that they did. They can talk about how they feel so bad for whatever. But the reality is, the most important thing to them throughout this entire process was making sure that he was able to be forgiven and get back on the right track. Like, that was the goal.
And the father of the 12-year-old, he is a member of the bishopric of your ward?
He was, yeah, at the time.
At the time, he was a member of the bishopric. Okay. Yeah, it strikes me, and it has struck me for a long time as a member of the LDS Church, that a premium is placed on acting like everything is okay. And the idea seems to be played out that if we act like everything is okay, then everything is okay, which
Right.
tends to lead to ignoring bad things, sweeping them under the carpet in order to pretend that everything's okay.
Yeah.
So he's still going to church. We've got
that morning, we did put enough pressure. I was in the primary presidency at the time, and I had told them about it. That was the first week we were going back to primary classes after COVID. And we did not feel comfortable. People don't watch their kids when they're going to primary. And we were like, we don't feel comfortable unless you do something about this, having primary today. So we kind of said, hey, we're not going to have primary today if you guys don't figure this out. And so eventually they did put enough pressure. The dad just didn't bring him. And that's how that ended up.
Yeah.
What was that like, Jared? I'm sorry, Jared and Ashley, what was that like? So you find out on a Friday or Saturday anyway, a couple days before Sunday. Sunday's going to be the first day you're all back at church. You now get the phone call from the 12-year-old's dad explaining what happened and saying what you described him as saying. Then you get a chance to think about it, because I know you're running around getting ready for the party. You have a chance to process it and tell us about that too. And then what steps you took when you realized that there's a 12-year-old who's going to be at church Sunday who really, really should not be alone with children.
Or their victims shouldn't see him. Like, they don't need to see him at church.
Right.
Like,
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, at 8 a.m. On that Sunday morning, like I waited at that time. I'm not this respectful anymore. But I waited till 8 a.m. to call the
Right.
bishop. I'm like, hey, this is an appropriate time. So I
And
did.
Jared, I'm sorry, you're the Elders Quorum president, correct?
I'm the Elders Quorum president at the time. And when I get on the phone with him, I tell him like, hey, I'm sure that you're aware of this thing. And he's like, well, what is it that I'm aware of?
he didn't want to say anything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So he's like, you can tell me. And then, so, we go through this little game. I'm like, yeah, I got a call from so-and-so. And
Your counselor.
your counselor. And they told me that their son had molested my daughter, like that one. And he's like, oh, okay, yes, I'm aware of that, And I'm like, anyways. So I told him, I was like, I understand that you are in a weird position here. However, this child needs to not be attending our ward. Like, that's not appropriate. And he's like, I'm so sorry, but
We can't tell people we can't come to church. They can't come to church.
yeah, we can't tell people that they can't come to church. And so I said, well, Bishop, I know that you know that that is false. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I know that because you got physically threatened that somebody was going to beat you up, that you had a persona non grata served. And that person is no longer allowed on the grounds of the church.
What we would
And
call a
since
trespass
then,
order.
yeah, no trespass order. Yep. And so, and also since that time, as the elders quorum, it's been my responsibility to make sure that we had one guy on each door of the building to make sure that this guy didn't come in and beat you up. And so anyways.
So it's like, this kid has already molested kids from your ward right now. They come.
Yeah, it's
Right.
not a threat, right? Like, there's multiple victims sitting in your congregation, and you're telling me that you can't tell him not to come? I was like, that's BS. And I said, by the way, what does coming to church have to do with this child's salvation? Like, I know at that time, I was totally TBM, right? Like, true believing all the way. And so I do care about everybody's salvation. And I'm like, but still, he can get his salvation from Zoom. Right?
At the time, only a few people.
Oh,
were
right.
back
This is the first time you're going back to church after 2 years, basically.
Yeah. So obviously, it's not that big a deal. Like, just let him roll up on Zoom. It'll be fine. And so he said that he couldn't do that. Then we go to church. He doesn't show up because there's been enough attention and shame.
I'm sure his parents don't want to be embarrassed by having him there, like at that time with.
Yeah, for sure. So
he never came back to that ward.
Correct.
They moved into a new ward.
Can I stop you just for a second? I know that now you got two people jumping in here, Jared. So try and keep your train of thought where you are, and I'll bring you back to it. But I've got to say that at Mormonism Live, we have had more than one story of adults who go to church, who get up in fast and testimony meeting and say something that the bishop does not like or approve of, and then getting no trespassed from the church, receiving an order from Curtin McConkie. And I can understand why a bishop would not want someone up there saying things that he doesn't think they should be saying during fast and testimony meeting. I think we can all understand that. On the other hand, he's not molesting kids. And he gets trespassed just for talking in sacrament meeting and saying things the bishop doesn't like. But here you've got an individual, even though he's 12, who has victims. The bishop knows there's victims, and yet he's been coming to church. Or the bishop had no problem with his coming to church until you pushed the issue. Is that right?
Correct.
Well, and here's the crazy part too, is that throughout the next 5 to 6 months, whatever August is, whatever. So anyways, 5 months, There was consistent pressure given to us
to
to
allow them to come back.
allow them to come back to our ward.
Are you
Like
sure
what?
it's okay now? Can they come back?
Who
Like,
was doing this, and what were they saying?
All of them.
Bishop?
All-
The bishop, the stake president, like we got so much shit from people in the ward, like with little passive aggressive
The
comments,
to our kids.
testimonies, like all of the things used to tell us that we needed to forgive.
And we did end up moving our records to another ward eventually because it was just too much for our kids and stuff.
Yeah.
Sure. So you moved to
And
another
so-
ward, and that's how you dealt with the issue?
Eventually. So
That was
in August of that year, we finally got the church like higher up to like make it so he was not coming back to our ward ever.
like they moved his whole family's records to another ward in the stake.
Well, in moving the family's records was something that the stake president could do, but there was a restriction placed on him that he could not return to our ward. Now, I haven't seen anything in writing. I was just told that
And the
By
wards
whom?
and stakes have changed since then. So who knows what.
Oh, right.
by the stake president. But that being said, like our issue with that was the only way that we were able to get them to make that concession is through coercion. Like essentially we put pressure on them and said, look, that's fine. You guys aren't going to do it. We're going to make a campaign. Like we are going to let everybody in the whole world know exactly what's going on.
Well, I had made a social media post too early on because they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing.
Okay, so Ashley, what do you think the leadership in the ward and stake should have been doing? And then tell us about your media post to address that.
I'm trying to think how that started.
I mean,
What did you
was
think they
pretty
should have
early
been
on.
doing?
Well, they wouldn't call and report the new victims to like the police. Like they're supposed to report that. They never reported at all early on. The counselor had for the first victim, but the church wouldn't do that.
and in our area, there is penitent privilege. However, the way that and by the way, in the lawsuit, the church is not claiming penitent privilege. Like, so that
Yeah, they're
is
specifically saying we're not going to invoke it.
yes, correct.
See, I read
And
it.
so which makes sense because the way that they found out about it was through the dad. And if you find out through the dad, not through the child, like it wasn't a confession.
Right.
And so that being said, they had an obligation to report. They did not report. It took them 71 days.
And I even knew at that point, like everyone else had reported. I told them, "Hey, will you make me feel better? Show me that you want to do what's right." And they just were so stubborn about it. And it was like they were so obnoxious. And they're like, "Jared, tell your woman to like stop bugging us or whatever." And so they wouldn't do it.
Now, I take it that first off, the 71 days is from early January to later in March. Is that right?
No, it was from March.
For our child.
So it was like what, probably April, May. It was late May or early June that they reported.
Okay, so from March to May or early June that they reported it to the police?
Yeah. And I will say, like, lots of people have also brought this to our attention. They're like, well, you know, what does it matter if the police already knew about what had been reported? Like, why does it even matter if they reported or not? And there's multiple facets to why that's important. But the first and foremost in my mind is when dad calls and he's the one that reports on this, or a counselor is the one that reports, there is context and texture that they bring to that themselves, you know, that may be nuanced, that may be
The soft sell.
like whatever. And each piece of evidence that comes forward gives new detail and makes a difference in piecing together what actually most likely / probably happened. And so there's a reason that each person that becomes aware of this, that is a mandated reporter, needs to share what they know. And so that is very, very important. And then secondly is acknowledging that it is an obligation that we have as a society to protect the most vulnerable. Like, there is an obligation. It's a social contract that we have, and there's a reason there are laws that surround this. And so it's very important to me. One of your colleagues made a post on Reddit yesterday about mandated reporting and how he's changed his mind on it. Like,
Oh, right.
yeah. And one of the things that's not brought up in this lawsuit, but that is very important to our story, is that I was abused when I was a child by someone who was about to leave on a mission in the next couple of years. My parents found out about it in the hallway after his farewell. And so, like, just horrible timing. Like, the whole thing sucked. Nobody reported on my behalf. Nobody did anything. And I do not know how many other victims there were. I know that my brother and I were a victim of this guy. However, in that statement that your colleague made, like, what it doesn't do is it doesn't give allowance to the fact that, yes, a certain percentage of people may say that, like, mandated reporting was harmful to them, right? Like, that it made their life worse. Okay, cool. Except for, like, it can be protecting future victims. That's a big deal, right? There can be false reports. That's okay. Like, Ashley and I have been a victim. I think we got swatted. Here, I mean, that's not the real word for it because it wasn't a SWAT
We
team.
think someone involved in this case called CPS on us just to make a dumb false report.
Yeah, but you know what? It was okay because they came to our house. They talked to our kids. They did an investigation. Everything was okay. False reports are fine. Like, I'm not saying it's a cool thing to do, but I am saying that the way that the legal system works, they don't just come in and take your kids. That's not real. And so, like, and then the last part of that is, so you can protect future victims, like the argument surrounding false reporting, whatever. But then the last thing that I think is really, really important is the morality surrounding that thing. Like, the bishop should not have to walk around carrying that guilt, knowing that somebody else is getting abused and that nothing's happening about it.
He can't do anything.
Also, like, they, as a good human being, they need to do anything that they can do to stop that victimization. And so I don't care. I could care less if the church gets sued. Like, in this case that came up this last week surrounding the lady in Idaho, one of the things that was said about that was that when they went for the penitent, like, trying to force the bishop to talk, right? Like, they said that unless this person releases me, then I can't testify. Bullshit. You can. You're just concerned about getting sued. And he expressed that. He expressed that he was concerned about getting sued. But my question from a morality standpoint is, what jury's out there convicting people for violating penitent privilege? Like,
and the church has enough money to cover.
Is that a thing?
Lawsuit anyways.
Yeah,
right. And just so you know, when we're talking about the privilege, about the testimony at trial, not the reporting. Okay. Yeah, he's never going to take the stand. He doesn't get to go in there and just testify about it. The judge will not allow him to if the defendant invokes that privilege. But I hear what you're saying about the reporting requirement. I don't want to get sidetracked from your story, which is very, very important. It's the main reason I want you here. I do want to give you a chance to express yourself, and hopefully you've been able to do that. But there's a really important part of the story that I don't want to miss, which has to do with what you'd said about this young 12-year-old who doesn't show up at church, and he doesn't go to church in your ward thereafter, but he does go to church. Isn't that correct? And there was a meeting and
Yes.
that part of the story, which I think is very important.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's one of the cruxes of the lawsuit, right? To show the intent of the church.
Yeah, so he moves to a new ward. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the new ward that he moves to is the largest primary in the state.
And lots of the parents already have concerns about him coming to their ward. Lots of people know us. They know generally what's going on. They don't want, why would they bring this kid to our ward?
Yep. And so, Bishop and stake president are aware of all the uncomfortable things. And so what they do is they invite the area authority, which, by the way, like in the last 10 years, I've seen area authorities in our congregations like once or twice. Like, it's just not a normal thing. Like,
Right.
that's weird in itself, right?
Who is the
But they
area
invite
authority?
so
you know
to
who-
their ward Sunday school.
Do you know who that is?
yeah, and
At the time it
Jeff Rosa is who it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was
So
area
Jeff
authority.
Rosa attends. By the way, he's a new area authority, so he has very little information on this.
Elder Miskin we dealt with before, and he was very nice, and then turned his back on us and sent a whole other email to the ward. So
Okay, hang on a second. Hang on. We need to go back and talk about that, okay?
that's right.
Tell
Yeah.
us what you did and what the friction was, because I understand you wanted people in the ward to know so they could check with their kids. Number one, see if they've been victims. Number two, protect their kids so they don't become future victims. And yet you were running into resistance on that. Please tell us that part of the
That's true.
story.
After I made that social media post, Elder Miskin had sent an email to our entire ward.
And tell him what the post said.
Well, my post just said that we had found out something had happened, and that local law enforcement and everybody was so nice to us, like CPS. They were so nice to us, so nice to our kids. They did whatever we could. And but I said, well, the church leaders have been terrible to us. Like, they've been victimizing us. They won't do anything to protect anybody else. They won't call and report. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. And so a week later, there's an email that goes out to everybody in the ward. And so most people in the ward that don't have kids don't know about this. But they sent this, to 500 people in the ward, that people who haven't been to church in years. So now everybody knows about it. And it was saying, there's some reports that we are not doing the right thing, not reporting. These are all false. Anyone saying this is false. It was pretty harsh. It was very pointed at me and the victims' families. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was calling Ashley a liar. And so, at this point, there's fight or flight, and I'm fight in this scenario.
And he had emailed everybody, what's not CC.
Yeah, so he did not CC anybody. There was no BCC. It was literally, well, no, he CC'd everybody, not BCC'd.
So anybody could have replied to that email, and it would have gone to everybody on the whole ward.
Just hit reply all. And some people must have, did they?
Yes.
Of course they do, because if you're blanketing a bunch of people, there's going to be some people who are going to hit reply all every time.
Well, intentionally. So
Jared had said, if you don't fix this email in 24 hours, I'm going to reply all and tell them exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And, as I'm going through this process, it's so funny now that I look back at it. We say that we're not respecters of person. Yes, we definitely were respecters of people. And so saying something like pushing back or negative to my area 70 was not comfortable for me. Right. But I was like, no, this is bullshit. I am.
The other victims, the other little boy victims, his dad was not so gentle, and he replied back, and he said, hey, your leaders are telling you things that are false in the email.
So he hit reply all, right?
And then
Otherwise you wouldn't have seen it.
The stake president replied back saying, I'm sorry that you feel this way, basically,
And the stake president hit back reply all?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So this huge drama now playing out in front of all the members of the ward, including the ones who haven't been to church in ages.
Yes.
And then there's people that reply that are like, hey,
What's
I don't know why I'm on this email.
I know you guys.
I'm
And
getting
then
a little
eventually-
uncomfortable here.
Eventually, he did send out an email
Retracting.
retracting it a little bit. It was enough. We took it and let it go.
We
Okay.
took the little crumbs
So that
at
was
the time.
That was Elder Miskin, who's not. He was the authority at the time.
So then he got released in the middle of this, and Elder Rosa becomes the new person. So he was there at the beginning. And by the way, when we sat down with Elder Miskin like 2 weeks into this, he sat us down and he's like, hey, I want to let you know that I understand what this feels like. He's like, when my daughter was younger, she was molested by a guy in our ward. And it was very difficult for me. And I wasn't able to forgive for a long time. I would get angry every time I saw him at church. Like, he's going through this whole thing. But the narrative was like, but I was holy enough that
So
eventually,
basically nothing happened. He didn't do anything.
yeah. So
Like, that was a terrible story to tell us.
Right. The story is that the fault was with me for not being able to forgive him for so long. And what is this about
Yes!
getting angry every time he sees him at church?
yes.
Yeah.
And he said that while his daughter was on her mission, that she had some dreams or something that made her remember it. And so she called him up and asked if that had happened.
So she didn't even know about it. Like, nothing had ever happened. Like, why are you telling us the story? Like, this is ridiculous. Don't tell us this. Like,
and so after that's the case, he's like, yeah, this did happen, and she was upset, but she was able to heal. That was the narrative of this story that he was telling us. And so at the time, he used all the church speak, like, oh, tone fluctuation and all of that kind of stuff that people do to manipulate in the church, whether they believe that they're manipulating or not. Like, that's what they're doing, and so anyways, it was this weird situation that we go through with Elder Miskin. And so we do that, and then
we find out about this meeting from other people because we're not in that other ward. People are like, did you hear what happened? Like,
And this is a
in this
neighboring ward to yours.
Yeah.
It's a couple wards away.
It was in the same state though at the time.
So does the whole family move, or does the kid just start attending there with another member of the family?
I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's also part of the pressure that we received is like he had two siblings, one that was away at BYU and one that was like a senior. The question was like, okay, well, is it okay if they still attend? And like that was given to us, which is a weird situation anyways. But they're like, it's really hard for them. All their friends are here. They didn't do anything. And at first we're like, yeah, I mean, I don't really see an issue with that. But then what starts happening is in the hallways, in testimony meeting, people get up and speak directly to them and say
Speaking
like,
directly
it's so,
to the older
Yeah.
siblings
Older
of the
siblings.
12-year-old?
Like, we feel so bad for them that people like
yeah.
you have to go through this and like
And so
even those kids would get up in testimony meeting and talk about how hard it is like for their family, like the things people are being mean to their family and stuff.
So you guys
like,
get publicly painted as the bad guys, basically.
yes.
yes.
It's insane.
But in the hallways, like just lots and lots of stuff, like where almost every week that we're at church, something comes up around it.
Or someone said something dumb to our kids.
Yeah, and so it's just
he was the principal of our kids' high school.
See, that's
Perpetrator's dad.
another little twist is that the bishopric member, who's the father of the 12-year-old, is also the principal of the high school.
He
You
was harassing
said,
our kids at school. Yeah.
yeah, your older kids, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So we have two older kids that
At his school.
he's given the stink eye. Like he's very dramatic, and so he would be like, like
as
that.
I'd walk into school. It was really weird.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, like, we already knew that about him. Like, he was already that way around
But
us.
my kids would like call us and be like, it's really weird. He's like staring at us as we're walking into school. Like, like it's weird. It was weird.
So you've got
Like,
no
just leave him
trouble
alone.
envisioning exactly what that looks like because you've been on the receiving end of it.
Yes. And so anyways, that being said, like, one of the things that ends up happening, because he's giving our kids so much crap at school, and it happened like
For a few months.
for a few months, and it was super uncomfortable for them. So we finally, and in the meantime, they were sending us letters, or emails.
The perpetrator's family was sending us letters and emails talking about how we should forgive, with like general conference quotes and stuff in the mail and email.
Oh, they general conferenced you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then in those letters, they'd say things to the effect of like, your daughter will, because she was so young, she'll never know what actually happened.
So why are we making this a big deal?
Yeah. And so
I will tell you, just to throw in here, I know we're going to get to the story eventually, the one we're laboring toward, right? But all this other information is great too. But I knew somebody, a woman who, when they were young, was a victim of sexual abuse by an older family member and kept it secret. Of course, it's the secret that can't be talked about. And then much, much, much later, she starts bringing it up and saying, we've got to deal with this. And she got the general conference talk sent to her by the alleged perpetrator, And I remember Thomas S. Monson and the story about the wedge, the axe wedge that was left in the tree, and the tree grew around it, right? And then the wind blew and it split the tree in half right where the wedge had been left. And we need to not leave those wedges in trees, which gets interpreted to mean we need to forgive people who have offended us.
And move on. Yep. Yeah. And so, I mean, that tells the whole story.
So he did eventually get released from his principal position.
Yeah, so because what we did is, after they sent us 4 or 5 of those letters, something like that, we took that to the district and we're like, hey, you guys need to do something about this.
At least tell him to stay away from our kids.
And then 3 days before the school year started, they moved him position.
So district position.
Yeah.
So he wasn't at that school.
And so anyways, he got promoted / demoted. I don't know.
But the kids in our ward,
transferred.
Lots of them go to that school. And so my kids would comments, oh, it's too bad. He's not so principal, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was not fun. So anyways, so that's what's kind of gone on for them. And then in the next little bit, they have this meeting at the new congregation because people are upset that he's moved over there permanently.
Right. And now we're going back in time in the narrative to March or early April of 2021.
So it was actually it was
fall of 21.
It was probably September when they finally
moved their records
over to this new ward.
But he had been attending since March at the new ward.
No,
I think that he did a lot of Zoom attendance before.
He wasn't at your ward. He wasn't at your ward.
Right. I don't know.
Right.
Okay.
So, and now as all of this is going down, and let's call it September, his dad, in this 3rd-hour meeting, we've got the area authority, the stake presidency, not just the stake president, the stake presidency, the bishopric. So all the local leaders that could be there were there, standing
in just a regular Sunday school 3rd-hour sort of meeting.
And so everybody, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is to say something that you already know, but that some members of the audience may not know, is that church used to be 3 hours. And what usually used to happen was that there was something planned on the 3rd hour. It's usually Relief Society and Priesthood, where you split up and you go and you have your different classes. But there are certain months that have 5 Sundays in it. Was this a 5th Sunday? I don't know. But
this might have been just a second hour. I think it's already 2-hour church by then.
Yeah.
But
It
it's
was just the
combined,
second,
right?
just
Right.
second hour. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was combined, men and women.
Yeah.
So in other words, you have a meeting which you get everybody there, at least all the adults
Yeah.
present in the same room when you want to say something that's important and you want to make sure that everybody hears. It's not just told to the men's group or to the women's group. We're going to bring them all together. We've got the stake president, stake president, his 2 counselors. We got the bishopric, which is the bishop and his 2 counselors. We've got the area authority 70, who you said was Rosa by this time, correct?
Yep.
All right. So what do you hear?
You know, and so for
back?
area authority, like he's over 27 stakes. So whatever 27 times 10, you know, it's probably 200, 300 congregations that he's over, you
Right.
know? So, I mean, that's
Like, it's pretty odd to make a whole meeting for him to come and to give the perpetrator's dad a chance to give his story. Like, have you ever heard of that? Like, giving
Well, no, I never have. I just
No,
have one
it's
other
weird.
technical question. The perpetrator's dad was a member of the bishopric in your ward. Did he remain in your ward as a member of the bishopric and attending there, or did he go to the new ward as well?
Eventually, he moved to the new ward.
By this time, had he?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about this meeting.
Yeah, so the meeting, they have dad get up and share his story of what had gone on with this child. And basically, dad got up and said, hey, I know that there's a lot of misinformation out there surrounding this. And so just wanted to get up and tell everybody what's gone on. And we have done everything right. Like in this scenario, our son has made some mistakes, but is repentant for those and is doing everything that the church has asked him and that the law enforcement have asked him to do. All he is being prosecuted for, or like something along those lines, prosecuted for, is for touching a girl on her chest and her bottom. And so, like, that was it. Like, he minimized what the abuse was. He didn't talk about the multiple victims. He didn't like go into detail. He didn't talk about you know, the first victim had some very egregious abuse.
Now, technically, he only got charged for one victim. They wouldn't charge him for the toddlers.
Yeah, and so
For the 7-year-old.
Yeah.
So he only got prosecuted for the 7-year-old because the younger victims could not corroborate.
Yeah, right.
And so that being said, I hear about this from somebody else. And then I call up the stake president. I'm like, hey, what the hell? Like, what did you guys do? And I said, I heard this. And he's like, well, that's what happened. And it's like, how in the world could you do that? Like, how does that make any sense? Like, you guys are trying to make everybody feel warm and fuzzy, but like, you're not giving us an audience, right? Like, you're not giving anybody else an opportunity to talk about what's actually happened. Like, I'm more than happy to share all of the dirty details that we know about this information.
Well, it's just so inappropriate to have that meeting. Like, I've never heard of anyone giving a forum during the
to an abuser's parent to diminish the abuse.
Like a whole meeting during church, like, doesn't make any sense.
So that
We're
everybody
talking to all the parents. I mean, that's what it's about, right? We're bringing all the moms and dads in. And there are some probably who don't have young kids, but we got to get them all. We're going to get them all in this meeting, and we're going to let them know that they don't have to worry about this kid because everything's okay, and he's taking care of everything he's supposed to do by the church and by the law, and he's repenting, so don't worry about your kids. Everything's fine.
Yeah, and to have an authority there, like, it just makes it seem like it's totally legitimate, I feel like, all right.
Right. And so the goal of the church in this was to diminish the abuse. Like, that was the goal. And like, one cannot help but feel like obviously these parents of the victims are unreasonable if this whole panel of people is getting up and standing behind the victim or the perpetrator's father to support what he has to say. Like, obviously it's us. Obviously we're the crazy ones, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, is that empathetic to victims of abuse? Is that, like, the prophet talks about how, the main goal is to make sure that people are protected and that, they love the victims and all of this stuff. That's not what any of that was about. Like, and so the, this narrative, like, that they get it, that they love us and they're doing everything and they use best practices and blah blah blah, all of
The
that's
gold
not true.
standard, Jared. They got the gold standard.
And and it is so sad, because to me, like, one of the things that's super frustrating to me, Ashley and I, like, I resigned my membership, so I'm no longer a member of the church.
When?
Ashley is, but no longer attends. And
When did you resign?
April of this last year, I believe.
Is that this last year? Are you 2023 or 22?
2023, yeah.
Okay,
back
so
to-
2023.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
did you stop going around the same time, Ashley?
It was a few months after that.
Was it all a direct result of how the leadership treated you in this situation, and
For me,
how they treated the
yes.
situation as well? Yes. What?
For me, mostly.
No,
Okay.
I think that there's more context and texture to that I think that she should share, relative to she felt abused by the leaders, but we went to our new ward and there were new developments there.
Well, so we moved to a new ward, like 2 wards away, like 15 minutes away, in a different, at the time it was a different stake. And after a few months, like, another kid in the ward told one of our children that there was an abuser in that ward. And he told her a name of a brother in the ward, a middle-aged guy who usually would sit in front of us and would always try to chat with our daughter, the one who'd been abused. Like, and he'd always be having kids on his lap, very chummy with all the parents. And he's like, yeah, this guy, like, he was bishop and then he wasn't bishop, I guess, a few years ago. And so we kind of pissed off. So Jared, I don't know, maybe you called the bishop.
I did.
And was like, hey, like, what the hell is going on? Like, you didn't tell us this.
And so the bishop came to our house to talk to us about it and corroborated the information that we had found out.
And he's like, I'm sorry, I should have told you since you came out of this.
And he's a nice guy, but I'm like, yeah, no shit. Like, yes, you should have told us. Like,
we literally move into a new ward because of this, and I already got a creeper talking to my daughter again. Like,
but here's the problem that developed out of that situation. And that is, like, this guy has annotated records. So when the abuse was found out about, it had not been prosecuted, but it was family members of his from out of state, and they found out that he became bishop. So they called the stake president right away, and they're like, hey, this is not okay. This guy's a sexual abuser.
So this is before, like, a few years before we moved into their ward, but it had happened. And
it's a good thing
Right,
the family members who knew what was going on with his cat
Yeah.
were able to help the stake president out with his spirit of discernment, which obviously was
Yeah.
failing at that time.
Yeah, for sure. And so then they release him right away. Like, it's a super quick release.
but we didn't know about this because it'd been a few years prior, before we even knew these people.
And so after that happens, they annotate his records and he's not allowed to work with youth anymore. Cool, except for the only people that know about annotated records are in leadership.
So the same day, the day after I found this out, I would play the piano in primary. This guy was substituting, leading the music in primary. And so I'm thinking, like, if you're a primary teacher and you ask someone to substitute for you, you don't ask if their records are annotated, right? Like, anyone could easily have
You're
him
just glad if you
substitute in
can
primary.
find somebody.
Yeah. So
Well,
I'm sure he'd have substituted in class. He drove youth to activities because no one knows except for the bishop,
Right.
That is
And
not a functioning system to
No, it
protect
happens.
people.
We've heard so many stories about this happening now in every ward, basically, in our state.
So the
yeah, and so
annotations really don't amount to much, except unless it's an official calling that goes right through the bishop, and the bishop looks at his record, sees the annotation, and says, "Oh, he can't have this calling as a young men's president or something like that."
And he's in the elders quorum presidency,
yeah, so he's now in the elders
so you
quorum
wouldn't
president.
think anything suspicious.
Right. So on the one side, the bishop's thinking, okay, he's with the elders, who are, of course, adults. So there's no problems with kids in the elders' quorum. But you don't have to think about it too long to realize that you've given this man the stature of being in the elders' quorum presidency, which adds, I mean, we all trust other members just because they're members of the church. That's how we operate as Mormons. That's why we get taken so often by other Mormons. But then when you give an average member a position of leadership, now that trust goes up amongst the other members.
Well, and so there's that case that happened in Michigan a couple of years ago, where the sexual abuser became the elders quorum president.
Yep.
And then
And the
what?
stake president and bishop knew about that.
Right. But what they weren't thinking about is like, well, hey, this guy is going to be taking around young men as his ministering companion, you know? And
Right. The
so,
Aaronic priesthood is going to be what, splitting with the elders to do the, I guess, this ministering now, used to be home teaching, very common practice.
yeah. And so like they're not thinking about that. And here's the thing, like with a multi-$100 billion organization, I do not give them any passes. Like now I look at this and I'm like, okay, you know, when people say to me like, well, what could they have done to prevent abuse? And it's like, I don't know. What's the policy at a freaking children's school? Like, what do they do? Like, how do they prevent this stuff? And then when something comes forward, what do they do to stop it? Because it doesn't look the same as religion, you know, and we would have no problem holding them accountable. And these are tiny little school districts, right? Like, definitely the church can put best practices in place to protect people. They choose not to. So they easily can make it so that the youth don't go out on splits. They can do that.
Well, and how many
Mhm.
kids, how many teenage boys or whatever have been abusers and then go on missions, you know, and at people's houses?
Well,
Right.
my abuser went on a mission 2 years after he abused me.
Mhm.
I
And
wouldn't be surprised if this kid goes on a mission that
yeah,
abuses everybody.
100%. You know, and so like the policies can be put into place. What people ask me all the time, well, like, why do you think that the church, like, what's their incentive, you know, to hide this, to tell a lie? Like, you think it's just because they don't want to lose the money? And I don't think it's that simple. I do think that they care about their money. Like, by the way, if somebody steals money from the church, they aren't coming back, right? Like, and they're excommunicated right away. Like, you do not mess with the church's money. However,
Right.
I think that there's multiple facets that really inform what the church does here. And I think to your point earlier that discernment is a major factor on this. They need, in order to hold the position that they do in their members' minds, they need to be able to show that they have access to information that you do not. Like, it is important that the bishop has discernment. It is important that the stake president has discernment. The other thing is, like, if they don't have the ability to forgive, what's their value, right? Like, so if this perpetrator can't be forgiven of his sins, how can you be forgiven of yours through the church and made whole? Like, so I think that that's also very important that they hold up this thing. It doesn't matter what you have done. You can be forgiven. You can be restored. And that is the value proposition of the church. And so, in as much as they don't have that power, then what is this all for?
I want to tell you what I find the most troubling about this episode that you're involved in and still living with. That has a lot of troubling aspects to it, but the most troubling thing to me. And then I want to ask both of you about the fact, as I understand it, that in August of this year, 2023, that the church was added as a defendant to this lawsuit and why that was. And then we'll close off. But so that'll be your chance to give any closing statements you have. But very briefly, the thing that I find the most disturbing about this is that we have a young individual, and his age really isn't that important, but he's a 12-year-old, going to be 13, 14, etc., who has an established track record showing that he has issues and that he victimizes other children. So he's done it here in your ward. You refuse to allow it to be put under the carpet, to be buried, to be hidden. And because of that, the leadership feels they have to do something, but the something that they decide that they have to do is to take this offender and move him to another ward that has all these new potential victims in it. And I can't help but think about the famous issues with the Catholic Church and their priests, some of whom would be found to be abusing children. And their solution was, well, we'll get them out of there. We'll just move them to another church, another parish. And the abuse would continue. It's almost like, well, if it's out of my sight, then it's not happening. Once again, this idea of appearance over substance, of looking like everything's okay versus actually addressing issues. So that's what I find to be the most troubling. And your thoughts on that, and then your thoughts about why it was that the church got added as a defendant to this lawsuit in August.
Yeah, I mean, the appearance over substance is my experience with the church in general. And that was what the unraveling for me of my faith is starting to discover the narratives that they sell versus what reality is. So that being said, you know, I feel empathy for many of the players in this situation. I've done business with multiple of them. Like, we've had them to our house and social things throughout our life. I don't assign all things nefarious to these people. But I also think that the church's system is set up in a way that allows good people to do bad things, good people to make decisions that otherwise, in any other context, they would not make. And I talked about this when we were on Mormon Stories. Like, when my dad found out that I had been abused, if it was by a baseball coach, I think he would have literally beat the guy up or killed him or whatever. But since it was from a kid that was about to leave on his mission, and Bishop had already determined that everything was all right, like, and that we needed to forgive or whatever that was, like, or that his penance was just approaching my dad in the hallway, that obviously that was right. And so that therein lies the endemic issue that's plaguing our church, And so I do think that's the major issue that we see here, is they want to put on these appearances of everything can be okay, everything is okay, continue to come to church and receive God. So, and by the way, give us your money too. We want that. So, so to the question of the lawsuit, like how the church got named. First of all, originally when we filed this lawsuit, Ashley and I were both in the church, and I remember clearly having the conversation with Ashley that I felt like we should add the church, but if we did, that it would likely be our undoing with the church, like that we would not be able to recover from that spiritually, like because we couldn't be enemies with God, essentially. Like that's where my head was at.
Because we knew they would try to bash us, and that wouldn't work out well.
Yeah, and so understanding that, like, as I finally start continuing through my faith deconstruction, I got to a point where it's like, hey, I don't care. I'll sue them. Like, that has nothing to do with anything now. Like, they're just an institution. And then, we had talked to our attorney about it a couple times, and he's like, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of nuance to this, blah, 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 blah. And then we take the depositions of the stake president and the bishop. And after that, my attorney called me up and he's like, hey, yes, you are right. We do need to add these people.
The stuff they said was very not good for them.
Yeah, well, and
They have a
also,
lot of stuff that they
yeah,
should have stayed on.
one of the things that they brought up multiple times in their deposition surrounding like youth protection training, and they're like, well, we really don't have policies for this or for that. They're like, but they said like 3 or 4 times they brought up the Boy Scout training. And
our attorney's like, hey, do you know that the Boy Scouts don't do very good in this either? Like
yeah, like but basically just talking about the lack of policy and procedure to protect people from future victimization. And ultimately our goal in this lawsuit is to inform change. And we realize like we're not so arrogant to think that any lawsuit that we're going to bring against the church is going to change everything. We don't think that. But we do think that we will be a proverbial drop in the bucket, but eventually the bucket will overflow. And that's what needs to happen. Like, change needs to happen. When I look back, I am emotional about the perspective that if things were different, like 7-year-old Jared would have at least known that what happened was wrong, right? Like what happened to me was wrong. And my perpetrator did need to suffer consequences that didn't just come from God. He needed to go to jail, right? He was 17, I was 7. And there is protection that the church is in, like, it is incumbent upon them to take care of their people, and they are not doing it. They are protecting themselves, and they are protecting the narrative that they want to sell. That's what they are doing. And so it needs to change. And so the lawsuit involving the church, yes, they do not have best practices. They do not have any gold standard. They're so full of shit when it comes to that. That's not even close. And so they need to change. And the only way that they will change is through embarrassment, is through litigation. And one of the things that we saw, I think it was with the Michael Jensen lawsuit, is like that intake form that Kieran McConkie had, that showed like all the pieces of liability that they're trying to avoid. Like, did it happen at church?
Right.
Was it from a preacher or a bishop or whatever, and so each lawsuit that happens against the church, there's a probability that somebody F's up and there's another little piece of information that comes out. Great. Super awesome. Like, those are the things that we're pushing towards. We want change. We don't want money. We want change. We understand that money has to be involved in order for our attorney to pick it up. We understand that money has to be involved so that there's notice that's taken. But ultimately, we are advocating for change in the church, and they can call it revelation if they want. I don't care. All I care is that they do better. They need to do better.
Got it. Very good summation, Jared. Anything you want to add in closing, Ashley?
No, I think that's good.
All right. Well, thank you. I do think that there is a cumulative effect to these different lawsuits that are coming out. They're being made public. They're being published about. They're being podcasted about. Word is getting out that the church definitely has a huge problem on their hands. And it's a huge problem that they can't get away with by just saying, oh, we have the gold standard in protecting children from abuse at the church, because we find out that that is not just a lie, that is a whopper of a lie. So I want to thank you both for coming on the show and sharing your story. Hopefully the sharing of it here at Radio Free Mormon will get the word out to more people. And you're right. The only time the church changes is A, when it costs them money, or B, when it's embarrassing to them. And actually, it's the embarrassment, I think, that really controls them, because they got tons of money to pay out. It's the embarrassment, and they should be embarrassed. They should be called to account for how they are not protecting children. And then when they are called on it at a local level like you did, the change they do is simply to endanger a bunch of other children in a different ward. And that's how we're going to protect the children, by moving the perpetrator over to a different ward where he can go to church. So thank you very much for bringing this on. Everybody, please hit like, please hit subscribe, leave a comment. Let us know what you think about this lawsuit and about the church and how it treats its young people and how it protects its young people. So that is, I'll take you off the screen now. If you hang on a second, I'll talk to you a little bit later. Don't go anywhere, okay? I know you're having a lot of fun there in the parking lot. Have you actually been holding that camera this whole time, Jared?
Yeah, I've been resting it on my knee, so
I hope so, because
Good.
you got to have a pretty sore shoulder by this point. Okay, I'll be with you here in a second. I'll just close out the show, okay? Talk to you soon. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. Once again, this is Radio Free Mormon. That is about all for tonight. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, and I will see you next time. This is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.